Well, Hebrews 12:1 says this, Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Amen. We're on a relay race. Sharon and I are. But I love relay races. Do you like relay races? I enjoy them. They're exciting to watch, especially at the Olympics. Have you seen the ones at the Olympics? Oh my goodness, they're exciting, unbelievable. Especially the handoffs, right? Because the handoff can make or break that particular race. You don't know if it's they're gonna have a successful handoff or not. And I always enjoy that part of the relay race the most. Well, the Apostle Paul likens his life to a race. Now, granted, he wasn't thinking of a relay race. Typically, we think of that as a marathon, right? He refers to his life as a marathon. Now, this happens to be in Marathon, Greece. We were there, not for that particular race, but we've been to Marathon, and you can see all along the road to Athens the different markers, and it's just an incredible sight. But today, rather than think of our race as a marathon, I want us to think of our race as a wonderful relay, a Thornton relay race, if you will. In our race, typically races have 4 legs, right? But our leg has a lot more. Our race has a lot more than just 4 legs in our particular race. And so you're going to hear about that. I started off our race, if you will, by going to Nyack College. And then after Nyack College, I went and served in my home church in Albany, New York. I was youth pastor there for 2 years. And it was a wonderful time. At the end of that time, we chose to go back to seminary. Again, we went to Nyack College, or to Alliance Theological Seminary. And we enjoyed that. And we could have gone overseas right at the end of our seminary time. But I wanted to be a church planter. And I didn't feel like, no offense, John, you may need to close yours, but just doing youth work for me wasn't enough when I wanted to be a church planter. I wanted some training in how to become a church planter. So we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, where we planted a church. I actually had red hair back then. And we planted a church there for 4 years, and by the grace of God, that church still exists. No thanks to us, I can assure you of that. But after that year, we moved to Toccoa, Georgia, where Sharon's mom, unfortunately, was dying with cancer. And so we moved there, and we were with her, and she did die that fall. And then we were able to be with Sharon's dad. We moved in with him for a while, and we were able to provide some help and comfort. Well, eventually, we were ready to go on our first international leg. And so on September 1st, 1985, we arrived in Hong Kong, a little city, about 7.5 million people, and it was a real privilege for us to be there. We went with our 2 sons at that time, James and Jonathan. They were almost 3 and almost 1 year old. And as we were disembarking the plane, there wasn't a gate at that point. This was an old airport. We were starting to come down the stairs. And as we were coming down the stairs, the heat and the humidity just assaulted us as though it were a gun aimed at us. I couldn't believe how hot and humid it was. Little did I know that assault would continue on our entire 8 years that we were there in Hong Kong. Oh my goodness, it was just hot and humid. Well, as was true of most Alliance workers around the world, we thought that we would spend our entire lives, our entire career, serving there in Hong Kong. And in fact, we did plant 2 churches in Hong Kong while we were there. We planted a church first amongst the youth, and then we planted another church amongst the elderly people. And we had a wonderful time planting and seeing people come to faith in Christ and baptizing them and seeing their lives changed. It was a wonderful opportunity for us. Now, it was an exciting time to be in Hong Kong, let me assure you of that. Because the announcement came the year before we arrived in Hong Kong that Great Britain was going to give Hong Kong back to Communist China. And so there was all this commotion in Hong Kong, and there was some fear and there was some trepidation, but it also opened up people's lives to the truth of the gospel like had never happened before. In fact, Billy Graham came to Hong Kong and conducted one of these huge evangelistic campaigns, and thousands upon thousands of people came to faith in Christ as a result of that. Our youngest son, David, was actually born there in Hong Kong. We need to flip one more. There we go. So our son David was born there, and he was the smallest because he was made in Hong Kong, right? So everything's smaller in Hong Kong. So, but we enjoyed our time there, and we engaged with local people. We were present. We were in their lives, and they were in our lives. We had a wonderful opportunity of investing in people, whether it was young people or whether it was elderly people. It was a wonderful opportunity to be able to really be present amongst them. And we were comfortably present in the lives of these people. We were having an enjoyable ministry. It was wonderful. We thought this would just be the absolute best place in the world just to continue on. Well, 3/4 of the way through our second term in Hong Kong, our terms are usually 4 years, our field director came to us and announced to the entire Hong Kong team that the CNMA, the Christian and Missionary Alliance, had decided to enter Russia. And we all said, yes, that's wonderful, great. Until the next day, our field director came to our house with an envelope in which was a letter inviting us to go and participate and be one of those workers in Russia. Oh my goodness. How could we possibly run this leg of the race? Could we possibly leave Hong Kong and move to a country that we had grown up thinking of as the enemy? Could we leave Cantonese behind for Russian? Could we survive the reality of sending off all 3 of our boys, a 1st, 4th, and 6th grader, to the Black Forest Academy in Germany? Well, in 1994, we flew to Kondern, Germany, and dropped off all 3 of those boys to attend the Black Forest Academy. We then flew via Moscow to the southern city of Rostov, Russia. Now, this leg of our race was very different linguistically, grammatically. Cantonese was very difficult because it's a tonal language and it has characters, but there's no alphabet. But in Russian, it's very complicated grammatically, but there's an alphabet. And so because we had studied ahead of time, we could read Russian. Don't ask us what it meant. But when we saw this next sign come up, we knew that it didn't say Pektopa, it's restaurant. It's a restaurant. So being able to immediately start reading Russian was incredibly helpful to us, even though we didn't always know what we were reading. Now, we again thought that we would spend the rest of our lives learning Russian and learning to reach the Russian people with the gospel. But after just 14 months, just a little over a year, we received a call asking us to drop everything and get to the Black Forest Academy in Germany, where the dorm couple, the mom and the dad that were watching our CNMA elementary kids, they had a family crisis and they needed to get back to the United States. And so they asked us if we could go and fill in for 6 weeks. Whoa. Now we asked ourselves this question: how could we possibly abandon the Russian language for German? We knew that it would only be for 6 weeks, but even so, would that be a long enough hiatus from our Russian to cause us to get linguistically confused? Well, now we found ourselves serving as surrogate mom and dad to 17 elementary-aged school children, most of whom were living in Russia, including our 3 boys. So we started to engage fully in dorm life. Sharon learned how to play street hockey. I drove the van to all the local stores to buy just 3 Kilo Hackfleisch gemischt. You know, of course you know what that is, right? Oh, maybe not. Some of you may, but it's a mix of ground beef and ground pork, and you put them all together. And I mean, I would just have to drive everywhere to buy things, and as a result, it was a very, very interesting time. We drove the kids everywhere. We drove them to recitals. We drove them to after-school specials. We drove them everywhere. We prepared meals. Oh my goodness. Sharon was overseeing. And then, of course, doing the laundry. Yes. Oh. So as a result, we were very much engaged. And we generally tried to make it a good experience for the kids and make it more like a home than a school dormitory type situation. Well, as that semester was ending, it was becoming obvious to us and to the Alliance that they didn't have anybody to replace us. So the end of that 6 weeks came, and they said, you know, Trent, Sharon, we don't have anybody to fill in for you yet, so could you extend throughout this next school year? And so we said, sure, of course, we did. And then we extended another year and another year. So we were there at the Black Forest Academy for 3 years on this temporary assignment. Well, in the late spring of that year, our regional director paid us a visit, and we had prepared our boys for the possibility that they may ask us to forego a year of home assignment, because we were due on, right? We had 1 year in Russia and 3 in Germany, so we were expecting to go home, but we knew that they may not have anybody, and so it's possible they may ask us just to stay on at the Black Forest Academy. And so our boys were like, yes, because that was their preferred option. They loved Black Forest Academy. And that's partly due to the prayers of the women of this district. I assure you of that. And so we're so thankful for that. Well, anyway, we had prepared the boys. You know, they may ask us to stay on. And sure enough, when the director came to our place, he was so thankful. He spent minutes just affirming what a great job we had been doing as dorm parents. And I looked at Sharon and she looked at me, and we kind of smiled and said, yep, they're going to ask us to stay. There's no doubt about it. Well, the next thing out of our regional director's mouth was, and now we'd like you to be the lead couple for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Whoa. Where on earth is Bosnia and Herzegovina? Now, we heard about it from the war. We had no clue where it was. But, oh my goodness, now we asked ourselves this question: how could we possibly leave these precious 17 little children in the care of people that we don't know after we've developed a relationship with them, and then go to a country that has been ripped apart by the seams from war? How is that possible? In fact, there were still landmines. There were dozens and thousands of landmines everywhere. In fact, we didn't even allow families with kids to come that first year because there were so many landmines. Well, as usual, we had almost instant confirmation from God that this was to be our next step, and it came through His Word. It was very clear to us, both of us, that our next step was going to be taking us, our next step in our journey. Yes, He does. And so as a result, we knew that we were going to be going to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So as that school year ended, we took a brief trip back to the U.S., thankfully, and we then returned to Bosnia. We dropped off our boys. We bought a car, and then we drove through Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Croatia, until we finally got into Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, our role as the lead couple was to connect with national church leaders, pastors, and those that wanted to be pastors, and to encourage them and to help them to speak, because these were new believers that were tasked with speaking every Sunday, and trust me, that was a chore for anybody, but when you're brand new It's a real chore. So we would travel throughout the country speaking, and that allowed our team, including Mark and Kathy, to focus on learning language. And they did, and they have done a wonderful job in learning language. So we met with them. Now, we had an apartment in a 7-story building that was badly damaged during the war. Now, it was a common sight in Mostar, well, in all across Bosnia-Herzegovina. Almost every single building in our city had been damaged like these during the war. Now, we had a nice apartment. It had radiators, beautiful radiators. Of course, they didn't work. And that's because in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it was a former communist country, and so they did a very communist way of providing heat. They had a centralized hot water factory, and it pumped hot water throughout the city to all the apartments and homes. Problem was that was destroyed during the war. So we had these beautiful looking radiators that had no water in them, and so no heat. So it got a little chilly in the wintertime, I can assure you. And we learned very quickly why the living room is called the living room. Because if you can only heat one room, that's where you're going to live. Trust me, I assure you. So, as a result, the physical devastation that we saw virtually everywhere was just obvious. I can remember picking up handfuls of spent shells, and sometime you'd see a mortar shell. They were just everywhere throughout the city at that point. But the emotional and spiritual damage that it caused to people wasn't always quite so obvious. But I am happy to say that it was probably the most fruitful time spiritually for the church. Because people who have nothing need everything, right? And that was the people, their case in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The atrocities that were forced on these poor people opened their hearts to the reality of the gospel. Now, for example, many people suffered losing almost everything they had. And so one of the very first things they needed to face the cold winter were wood-burning stoves. And so as a result, the evangelical church that we were working with received donations from the West, usually from Europe, but also from the United States. And one of the most sought-after donations, of course, were these wood-burning stoves. And so we would give out wood-burning stoves to anyone who needed it, whether they were a Muslim, whether they were a Catholic Croat, or whether they were Orthodox Serb. It didn't matter. If they had a genuine need, we would give them to these different people. And so, as a result, this very practical approach to sharing the love of Christ enabled congregations to be built up that had people from all the different ethnic backgrounds. Whether they were Serb, Croat, or Muslim, it didn't matter. They all came to the evangelical church. And the evangelical church became the only social institution in the entire country where all three ethnic groups were able to come together without fighting. What a testimony. What an opportunity. Not just to the people, but to the world, that the evangelical church is able to unite people that had been just a couple years earlier literally trying to kill each other. Well, our plan was to spend 3 years there while we raised up leaders within the mission, but also within the national church. However, after the very first year, the Alliance asked us if we would also then enter Macedonia and Kosovo as well. And rather than bring in separate lead couples for each of those other areas, they just asked us to do the lead couple for all three of those countries, and we created the Balkan field. Now, it was a little challenging traveling back then because these borders were closed. So in order for me to go from Bosnia, Herzegovina, down to Macedonia, I would have to fly up to Vienna, Austria, and then down. And that's the way it was for that first year, almost year and a half. Eventually, the borders opened, and we're thankful that we were able to drive. Although when you saw some of the mountain roads you had to drive on, you're not as thankful. So, we recognized immediately that that would not be enough time to raise up leaders in Kosovo and Macedonia. And so we would need to spend more time as the lead couple training leaders and encouraging and developing leaders in both Kosovo and Macedonia. And so after a year of home assignment, so we had a 7-year term, if you will, that 1 year in Russia, 3 in Germany, and 3 in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We went home for a year. I was still the field director. And then we went back, and instead of moving back to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we chose to move back to Macedonia instead. And then we traveled that way. So now we're overseeing a team of 25 workers spread across these 3 different countries and these different ethnic groups. We spoke regularly in churches. We encouraged pastors. We led field leadership team meetings. We prepared annual budgets. We collated worker reports, all the exciting stuff that nobody wants to do except the administrators. At one point, Sharon was the language coordinator for 17 workers overseeing that were learning 3 different languages, none of which she spoke. Now that's really gifting, right? That was gifting, to be able to oversee workers learning language that you don't speak. So that was a challenge that she met very well. But this attention to admin detail enabled our local workers. This is Mark Mindek, for those of you that may know him. He's the pastor up in Auburn. So Mark and his wife Becky were in Macedonia at the time, and by us doing that admin type work enabled him to develop these close relationships with local pastors and enabled him to really reach local people. So we took one on the chin, so to speak, to do all the admin while they get to have all the fun. Now, another ministry that we helped oversee was the receiving of short-term teams. Now, some of you probably here have been on short-term teams in different locations, and that's wonderful. This slide illustrates how important it is. We were meeting for our annual field forum, and we want to have something for the kids. But we don't want to have to do that, because then we have to watch the kids and we can't get fed ourselves. So a team would come and plan like a VBS for our kids. And this was the only, Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the only team we ever had that were all men. It was a great team, by the way. And we had a phenomenal opportunity for churches from America to come and minister to us. And so this same church, they had other people that were leading us in worship. And so, opportunities are just plentiful for people like you to get involved in helping out overseas. So, we are very thankful for churches like yours that have been involved in this, helping. So, as we came to the end of that particular term, we knew that we were going to leave the Balkans, but we just didn't know where we were going to go next. We didn't know what was next, but we knew that we would not be returning to the Balkans. Well, Nyack College then asked us if we would serve as international workers in residence. So our next leg of the race took us to our alma mater, where we both graduated in the late 70s. Now, serving as international workers in residence means that we teach, we encourage, we promote missions, and we have students into your home a lot. It was a great year. Connecting with college students was really a lot of fun. But the challenge, at least for us, was many of the classes at Nyack didn't get over till 9 o'clock at night. And then they would want to come over and hang out. And so after 2 hours or so, we would say, we're going to bed, just turn the lights off and lock the doors when you leave. But we really did have a lot of fun interacting with many of these college students. Now, this leg of our journey was coming to an end because we were just getting to the end of that academic year, and we were asked to consider a role with the Candidate Development Office. Here is a young couple that were pastoring a church in Minnesota, but felt the call of God to go overseas. And so part of our job would be to take these kinds of people and prepare them for serving internationally, as well as people that are in college to help them navigate the process of becoming an Alliance pastor. So they wanted us to do this out of Crown College. And so we decided that this was a big change, and so we needed to pray about it. And so as we thought to ourselves, we should probably get away somewhere to pray about what our future should be. And so we talked to each other and said, we should probably go to that really holy place that is known for, meeting God. And we went to Atlantic City, and we walked the beach, and we prayed every day, and just were in a posture of, God, what's next? We just really do want to serve you in whatever way would be most appropriate. So after that 3 or 4 days, we felt confident that, the next leg of our race was going to be working with the Candidate Development Office. And so that's what we had decided. But the person that we were working with at the national office, they were still trying to decide whether they wanted to hire a youth pastor or an experienced missionary couple like us. So they hadn't clearly made up their mind. Well, shortly before the end of that academic year at NIAC, their next year's international worker in residence canceled on them. And so they asked us, would we be willing to extend a year? Do you sense a theme in any of that? Anyway, so we said, sure, we would love to extend a year, because we still hadn't heard from the Alliance whether they wanted us to do the candidate development role. And since they hadn't shared that, we said, let's stay another year at NIAC. And so it was perfect for us as we got to interact more with students, and we got to pray more about what our future would be like. Now, shortly after deciding to stay at NIAC, the Alliance reconsidered their turning us down for that role. And they said, we've really rethought it, and we think we don't want to go with the youth pastor. We want to go with a more experienced missionary couple. So the Alliance said, can you do this? And we said no. And so they countered with, can you do both for a year? So for that year, we were living in Nyack, and we were on campus, and we were teaching and preaching, and we were encouraging and leading. And then once a month, we would fly to Crown College, where we would do basically the same thing at the campus for about a long weekend. And so that's what we did for that year. And then as that year ended, we actually moved to Crown College. And we did something that was the scariest thing we had ever done in our entire lives. Far more scary than moving to Bosnia. We bought a house. Oh my goodness. When you're an international worker, and the thought of buying a house is just daunting. But we felt that that's what we should do. And so we did. And it was a great house. It was far bigger than we needed. It had 5 bedrooms. But little did we know that our son with his 5 kids would come to live with us for 2 years. So God knew. And as a result, it was a great provision. Now, this leg of the race saw us traveling to colleges and universities, districts and churches throughout the Midwest. So from basically Ohio all the way to Colorado, we would go to these different colleges, universities, and connect with Alliance kids and lead them through the process of becoming an international worker or becoming a pastor. And so it was a wonderful opportunity. Then in 2013, we were invited to move back overseas into a regional role. Tim Crouch had been the regional leadership person for North and Central Asia, and he had just been asked by our new president, John Stumbo, to serve as the vice president of Alliance Missions. And so there was a hole there in the North Central Asia region. And so he invited us to serve in this capacity. So now this leg of the journey had us moving to Istanbul, Turkey. Oh my goodness. And from Istanbul, we were overseeing our workers that were scattered across the Republic of Georgia, Ukraine, Russia, Mongolia, and Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And from there, we traveled extensively. We would fly to these different places where we would encourage our workers and also inquire about their strategy that they were using to help reach people for the gospel. And after that very first year of living in Istanbul, China and Hong Kong were also brought into our region as well. Why not, right? So then we began traveling to China and to Hong Kong. And it became more and more difficult to maintain our residency in Turkey. Just became very, very challenging. And so we decided, well, then let's move back to Hong Kong. And so we did. We did the Thornton version of Full Circle Missions. Started out in 1985, and then we moved back at the end of our career in 2016. What an opportunity. From there, we would visit our personnel that were in China, and also other locations such as Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, which will coming up on the slide. That was our apartment. That's our apartment, the view from our apartment, and there we are in China and Tajikistan and then Uzbekistan. And so we met with all of our people, and it was a wonderful opportunity for us to connect with them. Serving as the regional leadership couple for North and Central Asia enabled us to oversee teams' budgets. Oh, how exciting. I mean, we really get all the fun. And we also oversaw their personnel and then their strategy as well, how they were going to reach out to the local people. So we spent considerable time encouraging workers to continue pursuing the call of God on their lives. And when we were not visiting in person, we were visiting via Zoom. Now, during COVID, I'm sure a lot of you got used to Zoom. Well, we were doing Zoom before Zoom was popular, and we did that a lot. And of course, one of the most important things we did as leadership was answer emails. Hundreds and hundreds of emails. That was our job. If an individual worker had a question, they would go to their team leader. The team leader knew it, they would answer it. If they didn't know it, it would come to our desk. And so every day we'd be answering 40, 50 emails of questions, interpreting policy and whatnot. Now, this last leg of our journey, we saw this was our sweet spot. Everything that had gone on before, all those different experiences prepared us well for serving in this regional role. And we are so thankful to the Lord and to the Alliance for allowing us this opportunity to have a regional role and a regional influence with not only our workers, but with national people as well. It has just been a wonderful opportunity. Now, as we look over our lives over these last years, there's one common theme that I see, and that is that we were present. We were present everywhere we were. We could not possibly have planted 2 churches in Hong Kong without being present in Hong Kong, right? We had to be present. You could not do that from the United States. We had to go in order to be present. Well, the same, I think, is true for us here in the United States. In our experiences in Russia, Germany, Bosnia, Macedonia, Turkey, we have to be present wherever we are. Now, we learned Russian, we learned Bosnian a little bit, we learned Cantonese, and we led these teams of workers by being present with them. That's the only way it can happen. So I think that we need to be present in our own situation here in Rome, New York. And so when God brings people into your pathway, you need to be present with them. So for example, you go to the hairdresser, you need to be present. Perhaps a conversation can be started. You might interact with the grocer or the mechanic, the teacher, the HVAC repairman. Whomever it might be that God will bring into your pathway, you need to be present. And if the Holy Spirit nudges you, you need to share what He's asking you to share. Well, now we're at the end of our career, right? We're getting ready to retire. We have a question. Who will receive the baton from us to go and take the gospel to the least reached of the world? Who will take the message of Christ to those who have little or no access to the gospel? Who will be present in places like Tajikistan or Mongolia? Who? Maybe you. Doesn't have to be a young person. Could be middle-aged, second career. But I wonder, who might it be? Could it possibly be somebody that is sitting in this room or watching via video right now? I wonder.